The dust swirled around her worn leather boots, a bitter shroud for the dignity being stripped from her with every passing moment. Ilara stood on the crude wooden platform, the scorching sun of the high desert beating down on her uncovered head, her calico dress, once vibrant, now faded and stained with the grime of a journey she had not chosen. Before her, a small crowd of rough-hewn men, their faces grim or leering, had gathered. Her father, his face a mask of cold pragmatism, stood to the side, his hand resting on the shoulder of her younger brother, Thomas, whose eyes, unlike his father's, darted away whenever they met hers, a flicker of shame in their youthful depths. It was he, Thomas, who had ridden ahead, who had spread the word in the sparse settlements that Jedediah Thorne was selling off excess burden before heading further west. The auctioneer, a portly man with a booming voice that seemed to mock the solemnity of her fate, was extolling her supposed virtues, strong, healthy, young enough to bear children, old enough to know hard work. Each word was a lash, each description a brand searing into her soul. She was not livestock, not a possession to be bartered, yet here she stood, the culmination of her family's desperate attempt to lighten their load, to trade a daughter for a few more provisions, a few more miles of hopeful travel. The injustice of it was a raw, burning coal in her chest, so hot it threatened to consume what little fight she had left. This moment, she knew with a chilling certainty, would forever divide her life into a before and an after. The before was a tapestry of hardship, yes, but also of belonging, of filial duty, however unrewarded. The after was a terrifying abyss, an unknown into which she was about to be cast. Her gaze swept over the crowd, searching for a spark of humanity, a hint of compassion in the sun-hardened faces, but found only calculation, curiosity, or worse, a predatory gleam. Was this all she was worth? A few silver dollars, a new mule, perhaps. The thought was a fresh wave of despair. She clutched her hands together, her knuckles white, her fingernails digging into her palms, the small pain a focal point in the overwhelming sea of her misery. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. Her pride, tattered as it was the last thing she owned. A bid was called. Then another. The numbers were pitifully small, a testament to her perceived value in this desolate corner of the world. Her father did not flinch, his expression unchanging. It was then, as the bidding stalled and a grim finality began to settle over the scene, that a lone rider approached from the east, the rhythmic beat of his horse's hooves a counterpoint to the auctioneer's patter. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, sitting his mount with an easy grace that spoke of long hours in the saddle. As he drew closer, Ilara could see his face was weathered, etched by sun and wind, his eyes a startling blue that seemed to absorb the vastness of the sky. He reined in his horse at the edge of the small gathering, his gaze sweeping over the scene, lingering on her, then moving to her father, then to the auctioneer. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a quiet observation, yet his presence seemed to shift the very air, a subtle change in the oppressive atmosphere. The auctioneer, sensing a potential new bidder, perhaps one with deeper pockets, paused expectantly. "What's the situation here?" the rider asked, his voice calm, yet carrying an undeniable authority. It was not loud, but it cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Jedediah Thorne stepped forward. "Just a private transaction, Mr. Family matter." The rider's gaze flicked back to Ilara, a searching look that seemed to see past the dust and the despair, into the very core of her. For a fleeting second, her eyes met his, and in that instant, she felt a strange, inexplicable flicker, not of hope, for that seemed too much to ask, but of something less than utter desolation. He dismounted, his movements unhurried, deliberate. He walked towards the platform, his spurs chiming softly with each step. The crowd parted slightly to let him pass. He stopped before her, looking up. "What's your name, miss?" he asked, his voice softer now, meant for her alone. "Ilara," she whispered, the sound rusty from disuse and choked with unshed tears. "Ilara," he repeated, as if tasting the name. He then turned to her father. "You're selling your daughter?" Jedediah puffed out his chest. "I'm providing for my family's future. She understands." "It's a hard world." The rider's blue eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "And what's the current bid for this provision?" The auctioneer, eager to resume, called out, $20, sir." "A bargain for such a strong girl." The rider looked at Ilara again, then back at her father. "I'll offer 50, he said, his voice even. A gasp rippled through the small crowd. $50 was a significant sum. Her father's eyes widened, a flicker of avarice replacing the cold pragmatism. 50, he confirmed, a new eagerness in his tone. And one condition, the rider added, his gaze unwavering. She comes with me now, and you and yours head west, as you planned. You don't look back. You don't ever seek her out. This transaction, as you call it, is final and absolute. Jedediah Thorne looked at his son, then at the meager supplies on their wagon. $50 would see them through many lean months. He nodded slowly. Agreed. The rider reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a worn leather pouch, counting out the coins. He handed them to Jedediah, who snatched them greedily. The rider then turned back to Elara, offering her his hand. Come down, Elara. You don't belong up there. His touch was firm, calloused, but surprisingly gentle. As her fingers closed around his, a tremor ran through her. It wasn't fear, not entirely. It was the shock of contact, the first humane touch she had felt in what seemed an eternity. He helped her down from the platform, his presence a sudden shield between her and the watching eyes. He led her to his horse, a powerful chestnut gelding. Can you ride? He asked. She nodded mutely. He swung himself into the saddle, then reached down, his arm strong and sure, and pulled her up to sit behind him. She hesitated for a moment, then, with nowhere else to go, she settled, her hands instinctively finding purchase on his belt. He didn't speak, just nudged the horse forward, away from the platform, away from her past, away from the family that had discarded her. As they rode, the dust settling behind them, Elara didn't look back. There was nothing there for her to see. Ahead lay only the vast, unknown expanse of the plains, and the silent men whose unexpected intervention had just irrevocably altered the course of her life. The sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, indifferent canvas to her turmoil. She felt the warmth of his back against her, a steady, solid presence. Who was this man? And what did he truly want with her? The questions echoed in the silent chambers of her heart, unanswered, as they rode deeper into the fading light. The journey to the rider's ranch was a long one, stretching through the remainder of that day and deep into the next. Silas, for he had introduced himself with a simple, named Silas Blackwood, spoke little, and Elara, cocooned in a mixture of exhaustion, trepidation, and a fragile, unacknowledged relief, spoke not at all. The rhythm of the horse's gait, the vast, open country, the steady presence of the men in front of her, it all conspired to create a strange sense of suspension, as if she were moving through a dream. She observed him covertly, the way his hands held the reins with confident ease, the set of his jaw, the lines of worry and experience etched around his eyes that crinkled when he scanned the horizon. He offered her water from his canteen and shared his jerky and hardtack without ceremony, treating her not as a possession but as a fellow traveler. This quiet, unassuming respect was more disarming than any overt kindness might have been. It chipped away at the icy fortress she had built around her heart. As dusk fell on the second day, they crested a rise, and below them, nestled in a shallow valley where a ribbon of river snaked its way through cottonwoods, lay a ranch. It was not a grand estate, but it was well kept, the fences sturdy, the main house built of solid timber, smoke curling invitingly from its stone chimney. A scattering of outbuildings, a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, completed the picture of an ordered, working homestead. It radiated a sense of peace, of sanctuary, a stark contrast to the chaotic desperation of her recent past. This is it, Silas said, his voice holding a note of quiet pride. Blackwood Creek Ranch. He dismounted and then reached up to help her down. Her legs were stiff, her body aching from the long ride. For a moment, she swayed, and his hand steadied her, his touch lingering no longer than necessary, yet conveying a sense of support that went beyond the physical. As they approached the main house, the door opened, and a woman stepped out onto the porch. She was older, her hair streaked with gray, her face kindly, her apron crisp and white. Her eyes, shrewd but warm, took in Elara, then Silas, a question hovering in their depths. Silas, you're back. And you've brought a guest. Her voice was gentle, with a soft lilt. Martha, this is Elara, Silas said, his hand gesturing towards her. She'll be staying with us. He didn't offer explanations, no details of the humiliating transaction by the roadside. He simply stated it as a fact, and Martha, after a moment's keen scrutiny of Elara's tired face and dusty clothes, nodded. Well, Elara, welcome to Blackwood Creek. You look like you could use a hot meal and a soft bed. Come on in, child. Martha's acceptance was immediate and unquestioning, a balm to Ilara's raw nerves. She followed the older woman into the house. It was clean, simply furnished, but filled with a sense of warmth and lived-in comfort. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the aroma of stew and baking bread filled the air. It was a world away from the barren platform where she had stood, judged and sold. Martha led her to a small, neat room at the back of the house. It had a single bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and a small window that looked out onto a fledgling garden. "This will be your room, dear," Martha said. "The necessaries are there. Supper will be ready in an hour. You rest now." Left alone, Ilara sank onto the edge of the bed, the springs creaking softly. The silence of the room was profound after the noise and fear of the past days. She looked around, at the simple, honest furnishings, the care evident in every detail. It was a haven, offered without condition, without expectation. Later, at supper, she sat between Silas and Martha at the sturdy wooden table. The food was simple but delicious, and for the first time in days, Ilara felt hunger, a basic human need returning. Silas ate quietly, occasionally exchanging a few words with Martha about the ranch, the cattle, the weather. He made no demands on Ilara, didn't press her with questions. He simply included her in their space, his gaze resting on her now and then with a gentle consideration that was profoundly unsettling in its kindness. Martha, too, was a comforting presence, her conversation easy, her manner maternal without being intrusive. After the meal, Silas rose. "Ilara, Martha will see to your needs. You're safe here. No one will harm you. Rest, recover. There are no expectations on you. This is your home for as long as you need it to be." His words were direct, unequivocal. He looked at her then, a deep, searching look, and for a moment, Ilara felt the urge to speak, to thank him, but the words wouldn't come, lodged in her throat by a knot of complex emotions. He nodded, as if understanding her silence, and then left them, heading out, presumably to check on the ranch before nightfall. Martha began to clear the table, humming softly. "He's a good man, Ilara," she said, her back to her. "A man of his word. You've nothing to fear from Silas Blackwood." Ilara watched her, the rhythmic movements, the quiet industry. Fear was a constant companion, but here, in this warm kitchen, with this kind woman and the memory of Silas's solemn promise, a different feeling began to tentatively unfurl within her, a fragile sprout of something that might, one day, resemble trust. That night, lying in the clean, soft bed, Ilara didn't sleep easily. The ghosts of her past still whispered at the edges of her consciousness. But beneath the fear, beneath the sorrow, there was a new sensation, the feeling of solid ground beneath her feet, the quiet assurance of safety. She was no longer adrift. She had been rescued, brought into a place of peace. The integration was just beginning, a slow unfurling, but for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Ilara allowed herself a single, silent tear, not of despair, but of an overwhelming, incomprehensible relief. The dawn would bring its own uncertainties, but for now, she was sheltered. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm at Blackwood Creek Ranch. Ilara, true to Silas's word, was left to her own devices, free from demands or expectations. In the beginning, she spent much of her time in the small room Martha had given her, emerging only for meals or when Martha gently coaxed her out to sit on the porch. She was a silent observer, watching the life of the ranch unfold around her with a wary curiosity. She saw Silas rise before dawn, his tall figure moving with purpose towards the barns and corrals. She heard the lowing of cattle, the nicker of horses, the shouts of the few ranch hands he employed, sounds of honest labor, of life being lived. Martha was a constant, gentle presence. She never pried, never asked about Ilara's past, but offered companionship in shared silences, in small gestures of care, a warm shawl when the evening air grew cool, a freshly baked cookie left on her nightstand, a wildflower tucked into a vase on the windowsill. Ilara began, tentatively, to help Martha with small chores around the house. Shelling peas, kneading dough, mending linens. Her hands, accustomed to hard work, found solace in the simple, repetitive tasks. It was a way to contribute, to feel less like a burden, though neither Silas nor Martha ever made her feel like one. She learned to read the nuances of their interactions. The easy respect between Silas and Martha, born of years of shared experience. Martha had been Silas's wife's companion, and after Sarah's passing from fever some 5 years prior, she had stayed on, becoming the heart of his home, a steadfast pillar of support. Ilara sensed Silas's lingering sorrow, a quiet melancholy that sometimes settled in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. It made him more human, less the stoic rescuer, and more a man who understood loss. He, in turn, treated Ilara with a profound, almost formal, respect. He never entered her room, always addressed her courteously, and ensured her comfort without being overbearing. His gaze, when it fell upon her, was kind, sometimes holding a flicker of something she couldn't quite name, a gentle curiosity, perhaps, or a quiet empathy. She found herself watching him, too. The way he handled his horses, with a firm but gentle hand. The patience he showed with a stubborn calf. The rare smile that would transform his weathered face, making him look younger, less burdened. She saw the respect his men had for him, the way they listened when he spoke, the easy camaraderie they shared. Little by little, the fortress around Ilara's heart began to crumble. The constant vigilance, the fear of betrayal, started to recede, replaced by a tentative sense of security. She began to speak more, short answers at first, then observations about the weather, or a question about a task. Martha would engage her warmly, drawing her out, while Silas would listen, his silence no longer intimidating, but rather, receptive. One afternoon, as Ilara was helping Martha hang laundry in the fresh breeze, she noticed Silas in the nearby corral, working with a young, skittish colt. The horse was wild-eyed, its movements jerky and fearful. Silas spoke to it in low, soothing tones, his movements slow and deliberate, never forceful. He didn't try to break its spirit, but rather, to earn its trust. Ilara watched, mesmerized, as gradually, the colt began to settle, its ears flicking towards Silas, its body losing some of its tension. It was a slow, patient process, a dance of understanding between man and animal. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky, Ilara found herself speaking. "That colt you were working with today," she began, her voice a little hesitant. Silas turned to her, his expression encouraging. "He seemed so frightened." "He is," Silas replied. "He's young, known nothing but the wild until recently. Everything new is a threat to him." He paused, then added, "It takes time. Patience. Showing him he's safe, that he won't be hurt. Trust isn't given freely, Ilara. It has to be earned." His words resonated deeply within her. She understood. She too had known nothing but a harsh world, and trust was a foreign currency. Yet, here, in this quiet corner of the world, with these two kind souls, she was beginning to learn its value. She found a strange comfort in the routine of the ranch, in the predictability of the seasons. She learned the names of the horses, the boundaries of the property. She even started to venture further from the house, walking along the creek, her eyes taking in the wildflowers, the busy insects, the clear, flowing water. One day, Martha found her sketching in the dirt with a stick, a surprisingly accurate depiction of the old cottonwood tree by the riverbank. Martha, without a word, went into the house and returned with a small, leather-bound journal and a stub of charcoal. "Thought you might find these useful," she said with a smile. Ilara looked up, her eyes wide with surprise and a dawning gratitude. It was a simple gift, yet it meant the world. It was an acknowledgement of her, Ilara, not just as a survivor, but as a person with thoughts and perhaps, even talents. That evening, she began to draw, filling the pages with images of the ranch, the animals, the landscape. It was a way to process her experiences, to give form to the emotions that still swirled within her. The development of trust was not a sudden revelation, but a slow, quiet unfolding, like a desert flower after a rare rain. It was built on small moments, on unspoken understandings, on the steady, unwavering kindness of Silas and Martha. Ilara was still wounded, still carried the scars of her past, but here, at Blackwood Creek, she was beginning to heal. She was beginning to feel that perhaps, just perhaps, she could belong somewhere again. The changing seasons at Blackwood Creek Ranch mirrored the subtle shifts within Ilara. As summer's fierce heat mellowed into the golden embrace of autumn, and autumn, in turn, gave way to the crisp, clean chill of early winter, the fragile tendrils of trust she had extended towards Silas and Martha grew stronger, twining themselves into a bond that felt increasingly like belonging. The quietude of her initial days had given way to a more active participation in the life of the ranch. She had a natural affinity for the vegetable garden Martha tended, and soon took over much of its care, her hands finding satisfaction in nurturing life from the soil. She learned to bake bread alongside Martha, the warmth of the kitchen and the scent of yeast a comforting ritual. Silas, observing her quiet competence and her growing ease, began to include her in small ways in the broader aspects of the ranch. He taught her how to properly saddle a horse, his instructions patient, his hands occasionally brushing hers as he guided her, sending an unexpected flutter through her. She learned to recognize the different brands of neighboring ranches, to understand the concerns of drought and early frosts. He never pushed, but when she showed interest, he shared his knowledge freely. One evening, as a cold wind howled outside, they sat by the fire, Martha knitting, Silas mending a piece of tack, and Ilara reading from a worn book of poetry Silas had surprisingly possessed. The domestic scene was so peaceful, so normal, it almost made her forget the terrors of her past. Silas looked up from his work, his gaze resting on her. "You read well, Ilara," she flushed slightly. "My mother taught me." "Before." She trailed off, the unspoken, "before my family found me a burden, hanging in the air." Silas didn't press. Instead, he said, "My Sarah loved poetry. She used to read to me in the evenings." It was the first time he had mentioned his late wife's name so directly to Ilara in such a personal context. The admission was a subtle offering, a glimpse into his own past sorrow. Ilara met his eyes, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "I'm sorry for your loss, Silas," she said softly. He nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. It was a long time ago. But the heart remembers. Martha, ever perceptive, changed the subject, asking Ilara about a new recipe she wanted to try, and the moment of shared vulnerability passed, leaving behind a new layer of connection. Ilara, in turn, began to share small pieces of her own story, not the traumatic details of her abandonment, but fragments of her childhood, the wildflowers she used to pick, the way her mother hummed while she worked. These conversations were hesitant at first, like testing uncertain ice, but Silas and Martha listened with genuine interest, their empathy creating a safe space for her to speak. The ranch hands, initially curious about the quiet woman Silas had brought to the ranch, had grown accustomed to her presence. They treated her with a gruff respect, mirroring Silas's own demeanor towards her. They saw her diligence, her quiet strength, and she was no longer an outsider, but a part of the fabric of Blackwood Creek. One day, a horse threw a shoe far out on the range, and Silas, needing to retrieve some tools, asked Ilara if she would ride out with him. It was the first time he had sought her company for such a task. She agreed, a thrill of nervousness and pleasure coursing through her. Riding alongside him, the vast expanse of the prairie stretching around them, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced since she was a child. They spoke little, comfortable in the shared silence, punctuated by the rhythmic hoofbeats and the sigh of the wind through the tall grass. When they reached the spot, Silas dismounted and retrieved the tools. As he worked, Ilara watched him, admiring his competence, the sureness of his movements. A stray lock of hair fell across his forehead, and without thinking, she reached out to brush it back. Her fingers grazed his temple, and he stilled, looking up at her. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the air crackled with an unspoken emotion, something deeper than friendship, more potent than gratitude. It was a look that lingered, charged with a nascent awareness, before Ilara, flustered, pulled her hand back, her cheeks burning. Silas said nothing, but his gaze softened, and a small smile played on his lips as he returned to his task. The ride back was different. A new consciousness had awakened between them, a delicate tension that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The unspoken had become almost palpable. Ilara found herself increasingly drawn to Silas's quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, the kindness that seemed to emanate from him like warmth from a fire. She saw the loneliness he carried, the echo of a past love, and a fierce, protective feeling began to stir within her. For Silas, Ilara's presence had slowly filled a void in his life he hadn't realized was so vast. Her resilience, her gentle spirit, the way her eyes would light up with a rare smile, it all chipped away at the walls he had built around his own heart after Sarah's death. He found himself seeking out her company, finding excuses to talk with her, to share moments of his day. He respected her deeply, admired her courage, and was increasingly aware of a growing affection that went far beyond mere protectiveness. He hadn't sought love again, hadn't believed it possible. But Ilara, with her quiet grace and her wounded spirit, was reawakening feelings he thought long dead. The development of their trust had paved the way for something more profound, a connection that was slowly, hesitantly, blossoming into love, as unexpected and precious as a spring flower in the harsh desert landscape. The shadow of Ilara's past still lingered, an unspoken fear, but for now, in the sanctuary of Blackwood Creek, a new hope was taking root in the fertile ground of mutual respect and burgeoning affection. The fragile peace of Blackwood Creek, cultivated so carefully over months of quiet healing and burgeoning affection, was subtly disturbed one crisp autumn afternoon. Silas had ridden into the small township of Redemption, some 10 miles distant, for supplies. Ilara was in the garden, harvesting the last of the pumpkins with Martha, when one of the ranch hands, young Billy, rode in from the north pasture, his face creased with an uncharacteristic worry. "Mr. Blackwood ain't back yet, is he?" Billy asked, dismounting and looking towards the road that led to town. Martha straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "No, Billy. Not yet." "Why do you ask? Is something amiss?" Billy shifted uncomfortably. "Well, ma'am, I was checking the fence line up by Coyote Pass, and I saw 2 riders. Strangers. They asked me if this was Blackwood land, and then they started asking questions about Mr. Blackwood. And about a young woman who might be staying here." Ilara froze, a half-picked pumpkin still in her hands. The blood drained from her face, leaving her cold despite the afternoon sun. Coyote Pass. That was the direction from which her family had come, the direction from which she had been brought. Strangers asking about a young woman. Her past, the one she had desperately tried to bury, was reaching out its chilling tendrils. Martha, seeing Ilara's reaction, put a comforting arm around her shoulders. "What kind of men were they, Billy? Did they give their names?" Billy shook his head. "No, ma'am. Rough-looking types. One was older, wiry, with mean eyes. The other was younger, bigger, but looked like he just followed orders. They didn't say much else, just rode off towards Redemption after I told them Mr. Blackwood was likely in town towards Redemption. Where Silas was." Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. Were they looking for her? Had her father, perhaps regretting his bargain or driven by some new desperation, sent them? Or worse, had he come himself? The image of her father's cold, pragmatic face, the memory of her brother's averted gaze, flashed through her mind. Martha squeezed her shoulder. Now, Ilara. Let's not jump to conclusions. It might be nothing. Just drifters passing through." But her voice lacked its usual conviction, and her eyes held a new anxiety. When Silas returned later that evening, the setting sun casting long, ominous shadows, Ilara and Martha were waiting on the porch. The moment he saw their faces, he knew something was wrong. Martha quickly relayed Billy's account. Silas listened intently, his expression growing grim. He looked at Ilara, saw the fear stark in her eyes, a fear he hadn't seen since those first days after he'd brought her to the ranch. "Did Billy describe them well?" Silas asked, his voice calm but taut. Martha repeated Billy's description. Silas nodded slowly. "It could be anyone, Ilara. But we'll be cautious." Despite his reassuring tone, a sense of foreboding settled over the ranch. That night, Ilara couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind in the eaves, sounded like an approaching threat. She kept seeing the mean eyes Billy had described, imagining them peering out of the darkness. She rose from her bed and went to the window, staring out at the moonlit yard. The ranch, usually a symbol of sanctuary, now felt vulnerable, exposed. A soft knock came at her door. It was Silas. He stood in the hallway, silhouetted against the dim lamplight from the main room. "Can't sleep?" he asked gently. She shook her head, unable to speak. He stepped into the room, his presence filling the small space. "Ilara," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Whatever happens, I won't let them harm you. You're safe here. I gave you my word." He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the windowsill. His touch was warm, strong, a lifeline in the darkness. "I believe you, Silas," she whispered, and she did. But the fear was a cold, insidious thing, seeping into the cracks of her newfound security. "But what if it is them? What if my father?" "If it's your father," Silas said, his voice hardening, then he made a bargain. A bargain he'll be held to. His protective instinct, always strong where Ilara was concerned, was now a fierce, simmering current beneath his calm exterior. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he would do anything to keep her safe. The love he felt for her, a love that had grown steadily and quietly, was now intertwined with a primal need to shield her from the shadows of her past. Over the next few days, an unspoken tension hung over Blackwood Creek. Silas instructed his men to be more vigilant. He himself rarely strayed far from the main house, his rifle always close at hand. Elara tried to maintain her composure, to continue with her chores, but the fear was a constant companion. She found herself scanning the horizon, jumping at unexpected sounds. The open loop of her safety, a question she thought had been answered, was now gaping wide once more. One afternoon, a rider approached the ranch. Not two, but one. It was the sheriff from Redemption, a grizzled man named Hank. Silas met him in the yard. "Silas," Sheriff Hank said, dismounting. "Got some news you might want to hear. 2 men were in town yesterday, asking about you. And about a woman. Matched the description of that Thorne girl your father bought off Jedediah Thorne some months back." Elara, who had been watching from the porch with Martha, felt her breath catch. It was them. They knew where she was. "What did they want, Hank?" Silas asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Didn't say directly. But they weren't friendly. One of 'em, the older one, name of Caleb Thorne, seems he's Jedediah's brother, Elara's uncle, was doing most of the talking. Said they had unfinished business concerning family property. They rode out this morning, heading this way, this way." The words hung in the air, heavy with menace. The shadow of the past was no longer a distant threat, it was drawing nearer, threatening to engulf the fragile light of her new life. Elara clutched Martha's arm, her knuckles white. Silas turned and looked at her, his blue eyes filled with a grim determination. The time for quiet healing was over. A confrontation was coming. The news from Sheriff Hank cast a pall over Blackwood Creek Ranch. The unfinished business and family property phrases chilled Elara to the bone. She was the property, the unfinished business. Her uncle Caleb, a man she vaguely remembered as hard-faced and grasping from her childhood, and likely her father, Jedediah, or perhaps her brother Thomas, were coming. Not for a sentimental reunion, but to reclaim what they saw as theirs, or worse, to exact some form of retribution for Silas's interference. Silas wasted no time. He gathered his small contingent of ranch hands, old Jed, weathered and wise, young Billy, eager but inexperienced, and Miguel, quiet and observant. "Boys," Silas began, his voice devoid of alarm but carrying an undeniable gravity, "we might have trouble coming. 2 men, name of Thorne, are likely heading this way. They believe they have a claim on Miss Elara." He looked at each man in turn. "Miss Elara is under my protection. This is her home now. We won't be looking for a fight, but we won't be caught unprepared. Keep your eyes open. Report anything unusual. And if they show up, they talk to me first." The men nodded, their faces serious. Their loyalty to Silas was absolute, and by extension, it now included Elara. She had earned their quiet respect through her gentle nature and her willingness to work alongside them, never putting on airs. Martha, her usual calm demeanor strained, busied herself checking their meager medical supplies, her lips set in a thin, determined line. Elara felt a surge of guilt. This danger, this disruption to their peaceful lives, was because of her. "Silas," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she approached him later that evening, "perhaps I should leave. I don't want to bring trouble to you, to Martha, to this place." Silas stopped his pacing on the porch and turned to her, his expression softening as he saw the distress on her face. He took her hands in his. "Elara, listen to me. You are not trouble. You are part of this place now. Part of us. Running is not the answer. Where would you go? Back to a life of fear and uncertainty? No. We face this together." His thumbs gently stroked the backs of her hands. "Besides," he added, a hint of a wry smile touching his lips, "I made a bargain too, remember? $50. I intend to get my money's worth in seeing you safe and happy." His attempt at levity, though strained, brought a watery smile to her own lips. His unwavering resolve was a bulwark against her fear. The next day dawned gray and overcast, the sky mirroring the mood on the ranch. Every distant sound, every rider sighted on the horizon, brought a fresh wave of anxiety. Elara found it impossible to concentrate on her chores. She kept glancing towards the road, her heart leaping into her throat at every false alarm. Martha tried to keep her occupied, but even the older woman's comforting presence couldn't entirely dispel the oppressive sense of dread. Late in the afternoon, as the light began to fade, Miguel, who had been stationed on a low rise overlooking the main approach to the ranch, galloped in. Patron. 2 riders. Coming up the valley road. They matched the description the moment had arrived. Silas nodded, his face calm but his eyes like chips of blue ice. All right, Miguel. Get back to your post, but stay out of sight unless I call. Jed, Billy, you know what to do. Martha, Ilara, please stay in the house. Ilara's instinct was to argue, to stand with him, but she saw the resolve in his eyes and knew he needed her to be safe, not a distraction. She nodded, her throat tight. She and Martha retreated into the house, but Ilara couldn't resist peering through the window curtains. Silas stood on the porch, his rifle leaning casually against the railing beside him, but his stance was anything but casual. He was a figure of quiet strength, waiting. The 2 riders came into view, moving at a steady, unhurried pace, as if confident of their reception, or perhaps, indifferent to it. Ilara recognized one immediately, despite the years. It was her Uncle Caleb, his face as hard and unforgiving as she remembered, his eyes narrowed, scanning the ranch buildings. The man beside him was younger, heavier set, with a sullen, brutish face. It wasn't her father, nor her brother. A hired gun, perhaps. Or another relative she didn't know. They reined in their horses a respectful distance from the porch. Caleb Thorne's gaze fixed on Silas. You Blackwood, he called out, his voice raspy. I am, Silas replied, his tone even. What's your business here? My business is family, Caleb sneered, his eyes flicking towards the house, as if he could see Ilara through the walls. I've come for my niece, Ilara Thorne. She was taken from her rightful guardians. We're here to take her back, taken. Silas's voice was dangerously soft. As I recall, her father, Jedediah, sold her. A fair transaction, witnessed and agreed upon. Caleb spat on the ground. Jedediah was desperate, not in his right mind. That don't make it right. She's blood. She belongs with her kin, she belongs where she is safe and treated with respect, Silas countered, his voice rising slightly, the steel in it now apparent. Neither of which, I suspect, she found with you or Jedediah. From inside the house, Ilara flinched. Caleb's face darkened. That ain't your concern, rancher. We're not leaving without her. You can make this easy, or you can make it hard. His hand drifted casually towards the Colt holstered at his hip. The other man shifted in his saddle, his eyes, dull and menacing, fixed on Silas. The standoff was clear. The initial words had been exchanged. The lines were drawn. Ilara's heart pounded. She saw Jed and Billy positioned discreetly near the barn and the bunkhouse, their own rifles ready but not overtly displayed. This was it. The confrontation she had dreaded was unfolding before her eyes, and the fate of her newfound peace, her very life, rested on the courage of the men standing alone on the porch. The tension in the yard was as thick and heavy as the impending dusk. Caleb Thorne's hand still hovered near his Colt, a silent, ugly promise. Silas remained outwardly calm, but Ilara, watching from the window, could see the coiled readiness in his stance, the unwavering resolve in his eyes. He was not a man to be intimidated. There's only one way this is going to happen, Thorne, Silas stated, his voice ringing with authority that belied his solitary position on the porch. And that's with you and your companion riding out of here, the same way you came in. Ilara stays. She is not property to be claimed or reclaimed. She is a woman who has found a home here, and she will not be forced to leave it. Caleb Thorne let out a harsh laugh, a sound devoid of any humor. A home. With you. What are you to her, rancher? Some soft-hearted fool who thinks he can play savior. She's our blood. Her father wants her back. He regrets his haste. Regret doesn't undo a bargain, Silas said sharply. And it certainly doesn't give you the right to terrorize her. She made her choice clear by staying here, by finding peace here. A peace you seem determined to shatter. Peace. Caleb sneered again, his gaze sweeping contemptuously over the modest ranch house. What can you offer her? A life of drudgery on this dirt patch. With her family, she has obligations. Duties, and what were those duties before? Silas pressed, his voice like the crack of a whip. To be sold off like chattel when it suited your brother. To be treated as less than human. At these words, something inside Elara snapped. The fear that had held her captive for so long was suddenly eclipsed by a surge of righteous anger, an echo of Silas's own indignation. She could not stand by, hidden, while he fought her battles, while these men disparaged her, dismissed her very being. Before Martha could stop her, Elara pushed open the door and stepped out onto the porch, standing beside Silas. Her heart hammered, but her chin was high. Caleb Thorne's eyes widened slightly in surprise, then narrowed into a venomous glare as he saw her. Elara. So, the little bird has found her voice, or perhaps her protector has given her one. Come down from there, girl. You're coming with us. Your father demands it. Elara looked directly at her uncle, her voice, though trembling, was clear and firm. I am not going anywhere with you, Uncle Caleb. My father made his choice. He sold me. He relinquished any claim he had on me. This is my home now, home. Caleb spat the word. This man has filled your head with nonsense. You belong with your family. Family. Elara's voice rose, laced with a bitterness she hadn't known she possessed. What family? The one that cast me out. The one that saw me as nothing more than a burden to be disposed of. Mr. Blackwood and Martha, they are more family to me than you or my father have ever been. They showed me kindness. They gave me dignity. Something you know nothing about. Caleb's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful whelp. After everything your father sacrificed for. Sacrificed. Elara interrupted, her own anger now a burning fire. He sacrificed me. For his own convenience. Silas placed a reassuring hand on her arm, a silent message of support. He then addressed Caleb, his voice deadly calm. You heard the lady. She has made her choice. There's nothing more to discuss. I suggest you leave. Now the younger man beside Caleb shifted uneasily, his gaze darting between Silas and his companion. He hadn't bargained for this level of defiance, for the woman herself to confront them. Caleb, however, was not so easily deterred. His face was flushed with fury. I'm not leaving without what's mine by right of blood, he snarled, and his hand moved decisively towards his gun. Don't be a fool, Thorne. Silas warned, his own hand a blur as he snatched up his rifle from the railing. But Caleb was committed. As his gun began to clear leather, a shot rang out. Not from Silas's rifle. From the barn. Young Billy, seeing Caleb's move, had reacted instinctively. The shot was not aimed to kill, but it was close enough. Caleb's horse shied violently as the bullet whined past Caleb's head, and Caleb, startled, fumbled his draw. The younger man, seeing his companion almost shot and Silas now leveling his rifle directly at them, threw his hands up in the air. Whoa! Hold on. No shooting. We don't want no gunplay. Caleb, struggling to control his spooked horse, glared murderously towards the barn, then back at Silas, who hadn't flinched. Jed and Miguel now also stepped into view, their own weapons at the ready. The odds had decisively shifted. Caleb Thorne was outmaneuvered and outgunned. His face was a mask of thwarted rage and humiliation. This ain't over, Blackwood, he seethed. You haven't heard the last of this. Or you, Elara. You'll regret turning your back on your own blood. Silas kept his rifle trained on Caleb. Ride out, Thorne. And don't ever come back to Blackwood Creek. If I see your face on my land again, I won't be so patient. For a long moment, Caleb Thorne sat frozen, his malevolence a palpable force. Then, with a savage jerk on his horse's reins, he wheeled the animal around. The younger men, needing no further encouragement, quickly followed suit. They galloped away, disappearing down the valley road, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a silence that was even more profound than before. Elara swayed, the adrenaline suddenly draining from her, leaving her weak-kneed. Silas immediately lowered his rifle and put his arm around her, supporting her. It's over, Elara, he said softly, his voice still tight with the remnants of tension. They're gone. She leaned against him, trembling, burying her face in his shoulder. The scent of him, leather, dust, and something uniquely Silas, was an anchor in the storm of her emotions. He held her close, his hand stroking her hair. Martha rushed out onto the porch, her face pale but relieved. "Oh, thank heavens. Are you all right, both of you?" Elara looked up at Silas, her eyes shining with unshed tears, but also with a fierce, newfound strength. She had faced her past, spoken her truth, and with Silas by her side, she had overcome it. The confrontation was over, but something significant had shifted. The evil from her past had returned, and it had been met not just by Silas's protection, but by her own courage. In that shared crucible of danger, their bond, already deep, had been forged into something unbreakable. They were, truly, a family, solidified in the face of adversity. The departure of Caleb Thorne and his hired gun left an echoing silence over Blackwood Creek Ranch. The immediate threat had passed, but the emotional reverberations lingered. Elara, still trembling slightly, clung to Silas's arm as they stood on the porch, watching the dust settle on the empty road. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, a dramatic backdrop to the turmoil they had just endured. Martha bustled around them, her practical nature reasserting itself, urging them inside, pressing warm cups of cider into their hands. Jed, Billy, and Miguel emerged from their positions, their faces etched with relief and a shared sense of victory. Young Billy was still flushed with adrenaline, recounting his timely shot, while Jed clapped him on the shoulder, a rare smile creasing his weathered face. Silas, however, remained focused on Elara. He led her to the worn sofa by the hearth, his arm still protectively around her. "You were brave, Elara," he said softly, his voice filled with an admiration that made her cheeks warm. "Incredibly brave. To stand up to him like that, after everything." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "I couldn't have done it without you, Silas. You gave me the strength. You made me believe I had a right to be safe, to be happy." Her voice was thick with emotion. "You always had that right, Elara," he said, his gaze intense. "You just needed to be in a place where that right was recognized." He gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for a moment on her cheek. The simple touch sent a shiver through her, a warmth that spread from that point of contact through her entire being. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the unspoken feelings between them had risen to the surface, raw and undeniable. The danger they had faced together had stripped away any remaining pretense, any lingering hesitation. Later that evening, after the ranch hands had dispersed and Martha had discreetly retired, leaving them alone by the dying embers of the fire, Silas turned to Elara. The house was quiet, the only sound the occasional crackle from the hearth and the distant sigh of the wind. "Elara," he began, his voice a low rumble, "what you said out there, about this being your home, about us being your family." She met his gaze, her heart beating a little faster. "I meant every word," Silas, a slow smile spread across his face, a smile that reached his eyes, banishing the last traces of weariness and tension. "I hoped you did." He took her hand, his calloused palm warm and strong against hers. "Because, Elara, this place, it hasn't felt like a true home, not fully, since Sarah passed. Martha has been a blessing, a constant friend. But there was always something missing. An emptiness." He paused, his blue eyes searching hers, filled with a depth of emotion that made her breath catch. "Until you came. You've brought light back into this house, Elara. You've brought life back into me." Her eyes welled with tears, but these were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of an overwhelming, joyous relief, of a love that felt as vast and boundless as the prairie sky. "Oh, Silas," she whispered, her voice choked. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I care for you deeply, Elara. More than I thought I could ever care for anyone again. What started as a duty, a desire to protect you, has become something much more. I feel it too, Silas," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "From the very beginning, even when I was so frightened, there was something about your kindness, your strength. I never expected to find this. I never dared to hope for it." He moved closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped and traced a path down her cheek. "Then let us dare to hope together," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. The air between them thrummed with anticipation, with the culmination of months of unspoken longing, of shared glances and quiet understandings. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to turn away, but she met him, her eyes fluttering closed as his lips met hers. It was a kiss that was both tender and profound, a kiss that sealed promises and acknowledged truths. It spoke of shared sorrow and newfound joy, of resilience and redemption. It was the kiss of a man who had found love again in the most unexpected of circumstances, and of a woman who had found not just a savior, but a partner, a true companion. When they finally drew apart, breathless, they simply looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them that needed no words. The evil from her past had been confronted and vanquished, not by violence alone, but by the strength of their conviction, by Ilara's courage to claim her own life, and by the undeniable power of the love that had blossomed between them. The ranch, Blackwood Creek, was truly their sanctuary now, its foundations reinforced by their shared ordeal and cemented by the love that had taken root and blossomed in its welcoming soil. The shadows had receded, and in their place, a bright, hopeful future beckoned. Their chosen family, forged in adversity and sealed with love, was complete. The relief was palpable, a collective exhalation after a storm. The antagonists were gone, their threats fading into the vastness of the plains from whence they came. The immediate danger had passed, but more importantly, an internal battle had been won. Ilara had found her voice, her strength, and in doing so, had claimed her own destiny. Silas, in protecting her, had rediscovered a part of himself he thought long lost. Their love, born from such unlikely beginnings, was now the bedrock of their shared future. The defeat of Caleb Thorne and his associate was not just a physical victory, it was a moral one, a testament to the power of decency and courage over cruelty and greed. The ranch felt different, lighter, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. The days that followed were filled with a quiet joy, a sense of peace hard-won and deeply cherished. The aftermath of the confrontation settled upon Blackwood Creek Ranch like a gentle dawn after a long, tumultuous night. The sharp edges of fear and tension softened, replaced by a profound sense of peace and a burgeoning, shared joy. Ilara found herself looking at Silas with new eyes, no longer just as her rescuer or protector, but as the man she loved, her partner in every sense of the word. His strength was still there, a comforting bedrock, but now she saw more clearly the tenderness beneath it, the quiet humor that crinkled the corners of his eyes, the deep well of affection he held for her. Their days fell into a new rhythm, one underscored by an open and acknowledged love. The stolen glances and hesitant touches were replaced by easy companionship, shared smiles, and the comfortable intimacy of two people whose hearts were irrevocably intertwined. Martha, ever observant and wise, watched them with a benevolent smile, her presence a warm, maternal blessing on their union. She had seen Silas's loneliness after Sarah's passing, and to see him find happiness again, to see the light back in his eyes when he looked at Ilara, filled her own heart with gladness. She treated Ilara not as a guest, but as a daughter, sharing recipes, stories, and the quiet wisdom of her years. The ranch itself seemed to flourish under this new sense of harmony. The work was still hard, the demands of the land unrelenting, but there was a new spirit infusing their labor. Ilara rode out with Silas more often now, not just as an observer, but as an active participant. She learned to mend fences with surprising dexterity, to spot a stray calf from a distance, her eyes, once clouded with fear, now sharp and clear. He, in turn, sought her opinion on matters concerning the ranch, valuing her quiet practicality and her innate connection to the land. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the vast, velvet sky, a familiar tranquility settling around them, Silas took her hand. "Ilara," he said, his voice soft but serious, "I've been thinking." She turned to him, her heart giving a little leap. "This ranch, it's more than just land and cattle to me. It's a legacy. Something I hope to build, to pass on." But for a long time, it felt hollow. Just work, without a deeper purpose. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the moonlit yard. "With you here, it feels whole again. It feels like home, a real home. And I want to share it all with you, officially." As my wife, Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of an overwhelming happiness. "Oh, Silas," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes," he smiled, a radiant, joyful smile that transformed his weathered face. He slipped a simple, slender gold band onto her finger. It had been his mother's, then Sarah's. "I've been keeping this," he said, his voice a little husky. "Hoping one day I'd have a reason to offer it again." She looked at the ring, then at him, her love for this good, honorable man overflowing. "It's beautiful," she said, her fingers tracing its smooth surface. "And it means more to me than any grand jewel." Their wedding was a simple affair, held in the main room of the ranch house, which Martha had decorated with wildflowers and autumn leaves. The circuit preacher, a kindly old man who visited Redemption a few times a year, officiated. Jed, Billy, and Miguel stood as witnesses, their faces beaming. Martha, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, looked on like a proud mother. Ilara wore a dress of pale blue calico, one Martha had helped her sew, and in her hair, she wore a sprig of late-blooming prairie rose. Silas, in his Sunday best, looked at her with such open love and pride that her heart felt it might burst. They spoke their vows in clear, earnest voices, promises of love, fidelity, and partnership, words that resonated with the hard-won truths of their journey together. After the ceremony, they shared a simple meal, filled with laughter and heartfelt toasts. The community of Blackwood Creek, small as it was, embraced their union. They had seen Ilara's quiet strength, her kindness, and Silas's renewed happiness. Their story, whispered around campfires and in the general store in Redemption, became a quiet legend of resilience, of unexpected love found in the harshness of the frontier. Life settled into a comfortable, joyful routine. The fears of Ilara's past still surfaced occasionally, like faint echoes in a dream, but Silas's steadfast presence, his unwavering love, was always there to banish them. She was no longer Ilara Thorne, the discarded daughter, the victim. She was Ilara Blackwood, mistress of Blackwood Creek Ranch, beloved wife, a woman who had found her strength, her voice, and her place in the world. The healing was an ongoing process, but now it was intertwined with joy, with purpose, with the deep contentment of a love that was both a safe harbor and an exciting adventure. They worked side by side, building their life, their dreams, on the foundation of respect and affection that had brought them together. The ranch thrived, not just because of their hard work, but because of the love that nurtured it, a love that had taken root in the most barren of circumstances and blossomed into something strong and beautiful, a testament to second chances and the enduring power of the human heart to find its chosen family. The coming winter promised cold and hardship, as winters on the plains always did, but within the warm walls of the Blackwood Creek Ranch house, there was only light, love, and the promise of many shared seasons to come. The seasons turned, each one etching deeper lines of contentment on the faces of Silas and Ilara Blackwood, each year weaving their lives more tightly into the fabric of Blackwood Creek Ranch and the vast, indifferent land that had, against all odds, birthed their profound love. The 5,320 years that followed their quiet wedding saw the ranch not merely survive, but flourish, becoming a testament to their enduring partnership and the values they instilled. It was a legacy built not on conquest or dominion, but on respect for the land, for each other, and for the generations that followed. Their love story, once a quiet local legend, transcended the mundane passage of time, becoming a foundational myth whispered across millennia, a beacon of hope in a world that would see empires rise and fall, landscapes shift and reshape, and the very stars in the sky subtly alter their celestial dance. Ilara, who had once stood on a dusty platform, a symbol of dispossession, became the matriarch of a lineage known for its resilience, its integrity, and its deep connection to the earth. The simple gold band Silas had placed on her finger became an heirloom, passed down through countless generations of Blackwood women, each one told the story of the quiet strength and unexpected love that had first sanctified it. The small room that had been her first refuge, her sanctuary from a cruel world, was preserved, a quiet corner of the ever-expanding ranch house, a reminder of humble beginnings and the transformative power of kindness. Silas, the righteous savior, the man of quiet strength and unwavering moral compass, became a figure of legendary wisdom. His teachings on husbandry, on fairness, on the importance of chosen family over mere blood ties, were etched into the collective memory of their descendants. The way he had stood against injustice, the way he had offered Ilara not ownership but partnership, became the guiding principle for the Blackwood clan. The ranch itself expanded, yet it never lost its soul. The original timber house, though added to and reinforced against the ravages of time, remained its heart, the hearth where Silas and Ilara had found solace and love still burning, tended by their distant kin. The fields yielded bountifully, not through exploitation, but through a harmonious understanding of nature's rhythms, a knowledge passed down from Silas and Ilara. The cottonwoods along the creek grew ancient and vast, their roots intertwined like the generations of Blackwoods who had sought shade beneath their boughs, who had listened to the murmur of the water and felt the enduring spirit of their ancestors. Children were born, grew, loved, and aged, each generation adding its own chapter to the sprawling saga of Blackwood Creek. They faced hardships, droughts, blizzards, the occasional echoes of conflict from the wider world, but the legacy of Silas and Ilara, their unwavering courage and their deep love, provided an unshakable foundation. The story of Elara's rescue, of her finding her voice, of their stand against Caleb Thorne, was retold countless times, evolving with each telling but always retaining its core message, that dignity is inherent, that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that a true home is built on respect and mutual devotion. The antagonists, Caleb Thorne and his ilk, faded into cautionary tales, footnotes in the grand narrative of Blackwood triumph, their greed and cruelty serving only to highlight the nobility of Silas and Elara. The town of Redemption, too, evolved, perhaps subtly influenced by the quiet integrity of its most steadfast ranching family. The principles of fairness and community, so evident at Blackwood Creek, rippled outwards. Over the vast sweep of more than 5 millennia, the world changed beyond recognition. Civilizations rose and crumbled, technologies unimagined in Silas and Elara's time reshaped existence. Yet, in the secluded valley of Blackwood Creek, a timeless quality persisted. The descendants, though living in eras vastly different from that of their progenitors, still looked to the example of Silas and Elara. The core values, love, respect, resilience, the sanctity of a chosen family, remained their guiding stars. The epilogue of their lives was not a single event, but an ongoing, unfolding tapestry of prosperity and happiness, woven through the lives of countless descendants. Their love did not just endure, it multiplied, it inspired, it became a living legacy. The ranch was more than land, it was a sanctuary, a testament to a love story that began with an act of commerce that became an act of salvation. And so, 5,320 years, and indeed, many more beyond that, perhaps even stretching towards 5,880, saw the enduring light of Silas and Elara Blackwood. Their initial act of courage and kindness echoed through the ages, proof that a single, righteous stand, a single offering of unexpected love, could foster a legacy of hope and prosperity that time itself could not diminish. The wind still whispered through the prairie grass around Blackwood Creek, carrying the timeless story of the woman handed over by her family, and the men who took her in, fostering an unexpected love that not only saved her, but created a dynasty of the heart, an enduring testament to the best of what humanity could be.